Welcome everybody, I'm Jeremy John, and I want to take you into the fascinating world of tour guiding. Every day in London, you'll find eccentric personalities guiding people in the footsteps of history. Some show historic architecture to overseas visitors, while others bring history to life for school groups. All the best tour guides have one thing in common. They know how to tell a good story. And that's why I started this podcast, to capture the stories of these tour guides. You will find out what drew them to this profession. You will discover which sites they love the most. And you will hear the secret methods they use to make history come alive. Today, I have a guide on the show who, well, this word is often overused, but I would say is a legend in London. He's been doing this not for 10, not for 20, not for 30, not even for 40, but for 41 years. He has been a full-time tour guide in London. He is definitely the guest on the show who I've most looked forward to interviewing, and the guest who I'd say who's by far done the most tours out of all the guests, maybe even put together. And his name is Richard Jones. Richard, hello.
Hello, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. What a charmer you are. How are you, I should ask?
I'm very well, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
You are welcome, sir.
Makes me feel old.
Well, experienced and matured and wizened, I think, would be better adjectives for you.
I'll go for that.
Fantastic. I want to start by letting the listeners know about you. So firstly, before we delve into your past, which we're going to be going into at great length, because it's a backstory which I think is very interesting and inspiring. But first, just tell us about the company you run and the tours that you give, because there are many, aren't there?
There are. Well, the company's Discovery Tours and Events Limited, and we do walking tours all over London, everywhere from Hampstead to Chelsea, Dickens to Shakespeare, Jack the Ripper to ghosts.
Well, Richard, we need to get into this backstory now. I first heard about you many years ago when I was working at the Monument to the Great Fire of London, and someone told me after I'd done a magic trick there that if I'm interested in becoming a tour guide and also could do magic tricks, the man I must meet, the tour I must go on, is with Richard Jones. So that's how I first heard about you many, many years ago, Richard. And then we've subsequently become friends, and I know even more about you now. So we're not going to go into the nitty-gritty of your inner world and inner life too much, but we do need the backstory of how a man ends up 41 years a full-time tour guide. Richard, how did you become a tour guide?
Well, I was actually a man of letters, quite literally. I was a postman, and I'd come down to London in 1977. I got a job in the civil service, which I absolutely hated. So boring. And then I saw an advert in a newspaper for postmen, and I thought, that's quite nice. So I started being a postman and going around the city of London, which was where I was based. I'd go around the city and I'd see all these places that I thought, they're really fantastic. So I'd start studying them, start reading about them. And on the frames, I'd be talking to the other postmen about things, and I'd just tell little stories. And then one day, a couple of the postmen came up to me and they said, could you do us a favour? We've got some friends coming over. Would you take us around and show us some of the places you talk about? And I thought, oh, yeah, okay. So I thought I'll do that. So I took them round and thoroughly enjoyed it. And then thought nothing more of it, and then got more and more into London. And as I did so, I started to think, I really would like to do that. And in those days, it was a bit strange because I didn't know the path in. I didn't know a career path, and there certainly isn't a career path as guides go. But what I did do was just thought, I'll just look more into it. And I discovered Time Out magazine, and Time Out magazine had a section then called Around Town. And if you could get into Around Town on Time Out, it was made for you, which I didn't know at the time. But I put an advert there for June 1982 to do a ghost walk on a Sunday night from Bank Station, and 18 people turned up on that tour. It was about 3 hours long. I just couldn't stop talking. But I just came away from it with a fantastic high. And when I went into work the next morning at 5 a.m., as you did as a postman, I was just sitting there on the and I was buzzing for about 2 days. I just couldn't come down. I just loved what I'd done. And I thought, I'm going to do more of these. So I started doing Dickens tours. And from that, I started putting more adverts in, more tours. And it just took off. And it's just led me on a career path that I'd never anticipated, never thought I'd go down. But as you say, 41 years later, and I'm still doing it.
Marvellous. Now, I want to talk about that buzz you said, because this is something that I think tour guides talk about it. On a previous podcast episode, I was talking about Sarah Pascal, the comedian. She actually was a tour guide for a time, and she's now comedian and writer, I should add, and many other things. But she talked about that buzz that she got when she entered on stage and told a joke and got that laugh. And she said, once you have that buzz, there's no going back. Would you say a similar thing for that buzz you felt then?
Very much so. It's the buzz of reaction. When you hit it, and it doesn't happen all the time, but when you hit it with a group, when you hit it off with a group, and when you can see from the group's faces that that group is hanging on your every word, the buzz is just fantastic. I suppose it's imagine, I mean, I'm not comparing myself to them, but I suppose it's like a rock star that you often hear about rock stars when they come off stage. They're just buzzing all night. They can't go to bed, which is why so many of them end up doing all sorts of things later on. And so consequently, I think it's that buzz. And it's an adrenaline. It's right there because, after all, who doesn't like being liked and who doesn't like having people laugh at their jokes?
Yes. I wonder as well, you mentioned laughing at the jokes. I wonder to what extent it's the buzz of also having created something out of nothing, that you came up with the lines or you came up with the angle that you positioned them to see St. Paul's, where you can get a better appreciation of the dome, or you took them down that alleyway that no one would normally go down and you found that thing. Do you think there's an element of that too, that part of the buzz is the creation? Because before you'd done these tours, obviously you'd walked the routes, hadn't you?
Yes, yeah. I think it's the creative gene. I think there has to be an element of creativity in anybody who's performing for the public. And after all, that's what a tour guide is. A good tour guide is a good performer. So I think a performer is a performer, whether it's a comedian, whether it's a musician. If you're a good performer, then you reach your audience. And it doesn't always happen. I mean, I've had tours where they've completely fallen flat and you just think, oh my goodness me, what am I doing wrong? But of course you can spot that happening. And I think if you're creative, you feed off that, which I've heard musicians say that they can actually feed off the energy. So it's not just your energy, there's an energy in the audience. And when that audience rises to what you're saying, when they react and interact with what you're saying, then I just think it's the perfect, well, I'm trying to think of a good word for this. I want to say perfect storm, but that's not probably quite the word I'm looking for there. But it just hits and you just come away and you just think, yeah, firing. I think that's the word. You are firing tonight.
Right.
And I know that's 3 words. Actually.
Well, someone actually, I can't remember who it was, but a tour guide many years ago I spoke to, he talked about it almost been like a spell. If you get it right, the audience are under your spell. I've always aimed for something which I think the bar is high here, but I always want everyone on that tour to be stood there thinking there's nowhere else in the world I want to be right now.
Very much so. And that's the magic word, that tour, because every tour has to be like your first tour.
Yes, that's a good point. You can't rest on laurels.
Yeah. You can't just think, oh, I've done it. I've been doing it for years. I'm just going to do it. Because that way, I think you lose your audience. When I go out, every tour I do is like I'm doing my first tour.
Bringing it back to the buzz in 1982, do you still would you say it's the same high? Does the buzz still impact you, or do you get a sort of tolerance to it? Do you get adjusted to it?
I think it's still here. I mean, when you do a good tour, when you do a decent tour, then the buzz is there. But when you do a fantastic tour, when you get a brilliant reaction, then the buzz just hits you and you just walk away and you've just got that feeling. It's one of those feelings that went during lockdown because, of course, one of the worst periods for performers, for tour guides, was lockdown because, of course, we couldn't do it. And I will say that one of the things I did miss then was that buzz, that applause at the end of the tour.
Well, there's buzz and there's applause. I think there's the buzz of doing the tour. The applause bit, I remember I called you up several weeks into the first lockdown and you said to me, Jeremy, I think this is the longest amount of time I've gone in decades without people applauding me.
It was. I even got to the stage where I used to go out when the clap for the NHS and I used to go and take the applause off all the neighbours.
Yes, I mean, people were banging on pots and pans. I don't know if that ever happened at the end of any of your tours, though. So
no. I got a few thrown at me, but...
Let me rewind back again to the beginning of your story. It's 1982, you said how you fell into it from being a postal worker, getting up at 5 a.m., curious about the buildings. You've started advertising in Time Out magazine. You've started to build up an audience. When did you actually know that this could be a full-time job? Because nowadays, it's not a standard career path. We're self-employed and it's very dependent on us being in good physical shape and getting the bookings. So Then, though, I think even less tourism, less reliability on that. When did you take the plunge? When did you know, or were you just winging it for quite a few years and hoping for the best?
I think I winged it for quite a few years. I mean, the big break came for me in 1984. So that was 2 years later. And I'd been doing it on and off. And I'd done a few jobs. At one stage, I even went to work for Richard Branson, selling a thing called Top Nosh around the industrial estates of East London, taking Earl Grey tea to mechanics and printers. From that, I'd always go and do tours and such like that. And I was literally just coasting. And then Virgin Atlantic did it was sort of a fam trip in 1984, 85. Can't remember the exact year, but they wanted to take people to New York, and they wanted to sort of take people who were representative of tourism. And I went and borrowed some money from the bank to actually pay for the trip. I think it was about £2,500, which was a lot of money in those days.
I mean, that's what, maybe 5,000 today or something.
Probably a bit more, actually.
Some nerdy listeners going to correct me on that, and they've calculated.
Depends who the Chancellor is.
Yeah, either way, a much higher price for a flight than you would pay today to get a flight to New York.
But that came with the hotels, but it also came with, we did a sort of tour of all around New York. We set up in halls, and we did basically selling to travel agents and tour operators. My big break came because Arthur from Holidays were there, and they came up and they started chatting with me, and they thought, we'd like these in our packages. So the lady from Arthur from Holidays said, come and see me at our Broadway office. And I went to see them, and she said, we'd like to put your walking tours into our packages for next year. And they did. And that was when I thought, this could be something completely different than what I've thought. Because to me, it was just a bit of beer money. And then suddenly that sort of focused it. And then I started really studying marketing, how to get your product out there. And I went back and forth between here and New York quite a few times. And I always remember I went to New York one day, July. And I don't know if you've ever been to New York in July, but it was humid. And I turned up in a woolen suit, and I can still remember walking down Broadway in this woolen suit with the sweat just pouring off me. But it was from that. It was from little trips like that, getting to know the people. And it opened up a lot of other career doors for me as well.
Wow. Well, what an interesting gear shift, shall we say. That was the moment then you basically went full time once you got that guaranteed work from them. Tell me about the difference between tourism then and tourism now. I mean, there's the obvious stuff that we now have the internet and booking systems that way. But in terms of what tourists are looking for, would you say it's kind of the same? Has it always been the same? Especially if we look at, say, American tourists that you were working with. How did it play out then?
Tourism has changed. I don't think the basics of tourism have changed. People still want the discovery. They still want to discover things. The difference now is they've got a lot more options they can find themselves. So, for example, today I doubt actually that I could actually go to New York and go and meet tour operators, because people tend to be back in the day was called FITs, Foreign Independent Travelers was the name for them. So you had group departments, you had FIT departments. It was all done. I mean, looking back on it, initially it was all done by telex. So I had to find an office that had a telex machine. Luckily there was one on Kensington High Street that did a bit like the WeWork or the places you go today where you could get a temporary desk, and they had telex. So I used to go and deal, and I always remember, I thought I'd really arrived. I was really sophisticated because I had a telex machine. and that's how you got your business. You sort of sent a telex over to a travel agent in New York or Sydney or Melbourne, and then they'd telex you back. In those days, I used to work from phone boxes around London. So in between tours, I'd phone people up from phone boxes, and you'd have pockets full of 10p pieces, 20p pieces. And then I discovered the Waldorf Hotel. And the Waldorf Hotel had these wonderful mahogany phone boxes with little sofas inside them. And they were ordinary phone boxes. And I remember thinking, this is brilliant. I used to go into the Waldorf Hotel of an afternoon and make all my business calls from their phone boxes, sitting in the sofa, just thinking, well, I've arrived. I've arrived. And funnily enough, about 2 weeks ago, I was passing the Waldorf, and I thought, I'll go in to see if those phone boxes are still there. And they're not. They've gone. So that's...
Did you, I mean, this is something, I don't want to get too crude here, but us tour guides, we all do know the best hotels, to use the the toilet facilities. Did you? Were they up to scratch? Because I must say, there's some nowadays that have 3 types of moisturizer when you wash your hands afterwards, and I've got so used to that if I wash my hands at home now, I feel I've only got 1 bar of soap here.
Yeah, the Waldorf was very much like that. I think it's one of the most important things a tour guide has to know is where are the toilets you can sneak into. And
yes. Well, let's move on to that then. Things we need to know toilets, but the essentials, because if there's anyone...
Essential oil for the soaps in there.
The essential oils, which the Waldorf... Well, look, if there's anyone really on this podcast that has more authority, and I know you're very modest and won't let me say that, but I think you've got more authority than most to tell us, having done tens of thousands of tours. I don't know if you ever kept a tally, sort of kept notches of each tour, but
I used to. The funny thing was, I used to keep a diary, and I kept all my diaries, and it was fantastic because I used to record what the weather was like on that day as well. So I'd record how much I'd taken, because in those days it was in cash, so you'd get. I used to go around with pocketfuls of pound notes and stuff like that. But I used to keep a record of the weather on that day, so I could actually see how the weather affected the tours as well. And I got rid of those in the early 2000s, all my diaries from back then, and I regret that now because it would be wonderful to sort of look back and think, oh yeah, it rained on that day. And one thing I do remember from the weather is that when I started doing it, November was always the month it snowed in. And I can always remember I'd do a Halloween tour, and then after Halloween you'd be about a week into November and you'd have snow in London, heavy snow. And that hasn't happened now for years. I can't even think when it last snowed in November. So it's interesting how those sort of observations, you can see changes that are going on, in the landscape, but also in the climate as well.
What is your advice to tour guides if they're working in awful conditions? Because when the sun's out, not too bright, but when you've got a nice mild day, you're coasting. The weather's nice, there's not a chilly wind. How do you manage a group of people in rain, cold, snow?
Shelter. It's all about getting them into shelter. So a good tour guide should also know where all the shelters are as well. By shelters, I mean like office doorways you can shelter in, or places like round St. Paul's, you've got that area by Stationers' Hall, which is covered, so you can get people under there. And it's always knowing about that. But it's always prepare the group as well. Prepare the group for what's ahead. So if you're in shelter and you're going to go out into the rain or the snow or whatever, so we're going to go here, but do not worry. At the next stop, which is a few minutes away, we'll be back under shelter again. So give them that carrot to get them to do that walk. And just remember, a tour guide is always going to be warm, because a tour guide is speaking and a tour guide is full of hot air. So basically, the tour guide's always going to be warm. But that group standing there are just standing listening to you. They're not being animated. They're not doing the deep breaths. They're not projecting. So consequently, the cold is permeating them. They're getting colder and colder. So watch the group, and the moment you see that look of hypothermia coming on, stop moving.
Maybe a step before the hypothermia. Do you think it's worth keeping them moving a bit more? Maybe doing more stops, but with less time at each stop?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, get people moving. I've had groups where I'm doing a story and I can just see that as a good guide, you're reading your audience, so you can notice when that attention is going because they're freezing cold. So why can't you split a story up into 2 parts to get them moving? Because that movement makes a heck of a difference. Was it Wainwright up in the Lake District who used to say, there's no such thing as bad weather, there's only inappropriate clothing?
Sure, yeah. Well, the other thing is you said about preparing the group. And this is something that fascinates me. And it's something that it took me a while to appreciate. We forget that we know what's coming next. We know what's going to be happening over the next hour and a half, 2 hours, however long the tour is. They don't. For me personally, stating the obvious isn't actually necessarily a bad thing and can be very handy to people if they haven't read the blurb of what's coming up on the tour, or they've forgotten it. They booked it several months ago. What other things do you put in your introduction? What do you like to give people at the beginning so they know what to expect?
Well, I think the first thing about an introduction is it's perhaps the most important part of the tour, because you've got to prepare your audience for what's coming. After all, they're going to invest 2 hours of their time in you. So if they turn up and you're miserable as heck, or you're just bored, then that audience is going to think, oh my God, I've got 2 hours of this. Whereas you've got to boost them up and say, we're going to have 2 hours of great entertainment. We're going to have 2 hours of fun. And they've got to go away from that introduction thinking, I can't wait to get started. So you've got to build them up with the introduction, but also you've got to give them a few pointers as well, because it's funny, especially with large groups, a sort of group mentality takes over. For example, crossing roads. People, if they're in a group, they'll just cross as a group. And I think you've always got to be aware of that, the safety element of it. You've also got to be aware that people will have questions. And a lot of people don't like asking questions because it makes them stand out in front of the group. And a lot of people aren't like us. They're not people who just want to be performers. They feel a real shyness about putting their hand up and asking questions. Funnily enough, I'm one of those people when I was a magician and when I go to the magic circle. I'm one of those people when they're looking for a volunteer. I sit there thinking, please don't pick me. Please don't. I hate being picked when I'm off duty, as it were. I hate being picked up and having attention shone on me. And a lot of people are like that when they're not in that mode. So consequently, you've got to relax them about asking questions. I always say, the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. So people have got to know, yeah, I can ask you questions. And then once you've done that, then get started. To me, very early on, I learnt with tours, story-wise, you need a powerful story to begin with, a powerful story midway through, and an absolute corker of a story to end on. Give them those three, and then put the stuff in between, which are good stories, but you need the ones that hit first, middle, and end. Mm-hmm. And I think it's like, I think crafting a tour is like writing a novel.
If you've ever got a family and you've got young kids, I always get that David Bowie song in my head, We Could Be Heroes Just for One Day. I think, how can we make the kids the heroes here? Yeah. And I like to throw them stuff where I'm like, kids, can any of you see such and such? And then they find it themselves. Do you have any other techniques like that with kids especially?
Yeah, I think with little kids, young kids, it is about giving them things to find. So, for example, stand outside Bank Station and say, can you find the dragons? Can you find the dragons, which are on top of all the lampposts? And then sometimes give them a nudge towards them. So I think there's things like that. I mean, one of my favourite with kids is crossing Westminster Bridge. As we turn onto the bridge, I always say to kids, okay, who's going to be the first to see Big Ben? And then the kids will come onto the bridge and they'll start pointing at Big Ben, going, I can see it. I say, where? They go, it's over there. I go, I can't see it. And they go, where? They go, no, it's over there. I go, where? And they go, there. And of course, that gives you the chance then to introduce, well, you can't actually see Big Ben because Big Ben's the bell that hangs inside it. And that gives you a chance to then do that story. But you've done it in a nice way. You've got them excited. You've got them involved. Yeah. And I think from that point on, especially with kids, when you're doing a family, the important thing is to win the kids over. Because if those kids get bored, the whole day is gone. It's going to be an absolute nightmare. So you've got to, from the get-go, you've got to have those kids working with you and get them involved and ask them questions. And they might answer something wrong, but why just go, no, that's wrong? Why just go, oh, it's interesting? And it's one of my favorite ones is to go, if someone gets the wrong, or I ask a question, I get the wrong answer, I go, interesting answer, but wrong.
You said the importance of getting kids involved. The way I've always seen it is quite simple, is that if the kids are into it, the parents are happy. Yeah. But if you go the other approach, you get the parents really into it, that just make the kids happy.
I think so, but I think parents on the whole will grin and bear it. Whereas I think kids, once a kid gets bored, and I've got two of my own, well, they're men now, but I remember when they were little, there is nothing more miserable for a parent than to have kids who are bored. I mean, kids will humiliate you. I mean, just out of this is boring. An adult will hold back. A kid won't hold back. Oh, well, where's this going to end? How long's left?
I do a lot of work now with school groups, and with kids, I find often they're pleasantly surprised. If you play it right, and if you get you will point about get them early on, but I find with teenagers, if you're quirky, if you're kind of a bit off the wall, they can be much more forgiving and more kind of curious of like, oh, hang on, what is this? What's going to happen next? Have you had that experience, would you say, over the years with school groups as well?
Oh, very much so. I think school groups are, I mean, I remember when I was starting out, the very first school groups I did, I used to do a lot for primary schools, they used to do a lot of Shakespeare tours. And I always remember that I used to get the kids together. And I very quickly learned that the way to treat especially primary school kids is not to give them a 2-hour tour, not to give them a 2-hour lecture, because you will lose them. So what I did was I used to turn the whole tour, we'd be a group of travelling players. And so I'd get people being the actors, I'd get people being the acrobats, people being the jugglers, I'd have people playing playing the music like they did in Shakespeare's day to get there. They're involved then, and this is where I think being a magician and being a tour guide comes in as well, because I think the best way when you do kids' birthday parties as a magician is not just to perform to the kids, to actually get the kids involved in it as well. And it's the old pantomime thing, well, he's behind you. Once they feel involved, then you've got them. And kids always ask the best questions. Kids always ask the question that adults never think to ask. I do a story about the knocker-upper that used to wake people up in Victorian times by knocking on the windows and with a big hook and then waking them up. And I do it on adult tours, I do it on kids' tours.
Sorry, just for the listener, can you just digress a bit more about the knocker-upper before we get to the punchline? Because I know what you're referring to, but just say a bit more.
The knocker-upper was mostly a man. There were women knocker-uppers, but in the days when people had to get up at 4 o'clock, when they didn't have the iPhone or the smartphone or the alarm clock, they had to be certain they were up. So they used to have these people whose job it was to go round and knock people up. And they would...
knock people up in modern lingo.
In Victorian lingo.
To
knock
wake
on the
them
windows.
up. Knock on the door to wake them up.
Wake on the window. Not what you're thinking there, Jeremy. But they used to wake them up by knocking on their windows. And kids always ask the question, well, who got the knocker-upper up then? Yeah. And adults never ask the obvious question.
It's quite a deep question. It's like who guards the guards? Yeah. It's well, neither of us are neuroscientists here on the human brain, but at some point through development, people learn when you shouldn't pipe up. And it happens at some point, but I find there's a big difference between primary school and secondary school. I was doing a talk at the Monument to the Great Fire of London for 7-year-olds who were studying the Great Fire of London, and I was explaining to them how the fire spread because most of the buildings were made of wood. And I keep talking, and this guy, little boy, he's got his hand up at the front row, and he goes, Jeremy, you cannot just have a building made of wood. That would just be the skeleton structure. You also need wattle and daub to fill the walls. You've also got to have a thatched roof. Otherwise, and the worst thing is he was right, because I'd said your buildings were made of wood. And of course, but not only that, the girl next to him just piped up, yeah, Daniel's right about that. And I've got a mutiny now. The thing about them is that they were right. If you were to really dissect what I've been saying to them, you can't just have buildings made of wood. But I think at some point, by the time people become teenagers, they're aware of, he's referring to the most flammable material. There's something with primary school where I find that.
Yeah.
But I kind of quite like the challenge. It does make me ponder that. I don't know if you've had any incidents like that where you've been caught out.
Oh, no, all the time. I mean, and the ones who will do it will be kids. I mean, it happens on adult tours, but let's say little kids, because in a way, it's quite flattering because it means they're paying attention because they've spotted something, and it means they're thinking about what you're saying, and that's the great thing. But it can be embarrassing, as I say. I mean, I always like with the Great Fire of London. Like you, I do a lot of primary schools on the Great Fire of London to take them round, etc. I always love the Thomas Bloodworth, the Lord Mayor, his comment when asked when he was woken up and said to put the fire. And I always say to the kids, because often the parents are there as well. I say, well, I'm not going to say exactly what he did say. Ask your parents to look it up when they get home. And straight back to the parents. Something like that, the kids start wondering about, going, well, what did he say? What did he say? and I just think things like that. But no, I think it can be flattering. Kids think a lot more because their brains are developing. I think by the time you get to the teenage years, by the time you get sort of 14 and 15, it's not cool. It's not cool to be, for primary school kids, they're on a tour and they're just out to enjoy. But then you get to the 14, 15, things aren't cool anymore. I remember my lads when they were going to school, and I see this so many times with school groups, is no matter what the weather is, the kids never turn up with raincoats because it's not cool to have a raincoat. Well, a lot of them. My kids never went out in raincoats.
Too practical.
Yeah. Well, it's not cool.
Right.
And I think the mistake a lot of people make with teenagers is they expect them to listen. And there's a difference between demanding attention and commanding attention. And I think if you can command attention from teenagers, then you will get them in. And it's things like asking them questions, getting them involved. Don't say, stand there for 2 hours and listen to me. Say to them, well, feel free to discuss things with me. Argue with me if you want. If I say something you disagree with it, then disagree with it. And that way they think, oh, this is good then. And then once you can get over that, and I think a lot of it is shyness, but I think once you get over that barrier and that barrier breaks down, yes, you're always going to get the classroom comedian who's determined to get you. But I think if you get over that barrier and then get them interacting with you as opposed to you just talking at them, then I think teenagers can be fantastic, and I love taking those groups around.
Richard, we've covered a lot of ground already, but with your wealth of knowledge, I want to ask you other things. Specifically for wannabe tour guides or tour guides just starting out in the business, what other bits of advice? You've given a few comments on what makes good tours great, but can you think of any other things to bring to the table?
I think one of the most important things is that as a guide, you're the audience's window into the past or window into what the subject of the tour is. So consequently, those people have come on the tour, they've come to be entertained, but they've also come to be educated as well, to learn a bit. I think one of the most important things is never make the tour about you. Don't tell the audience what you've done. Don't say, I every so often on a tour, I might say, I'm just coming up to my 42nd year now in tour guiding. But on the whole, I don't really mention it that much. That tour's got to be the first tour. So I think the most important thing for me is do every tour like it's your first tour. And again, it's like a magician. Again, we're both magicians. And I think that's one of the good things to have, that element. Because one of the ways that a magician can be so convincing is that they react to their trick. They might have done that trick 500 times, 5,000 times, 50,000 times, but every time they do the trick, a good magician will react. It's, wow, I wasn't expecting that to happen. And I think that's the element of a good tour guide as well, that every time you tell a story, it's the first time you've told the story, and you react with wonder at the story you've told them. Yeah, you've probably told it 10,000 times or whatever, but every time you tell it, it's got to have that freshness, as though you've never heard it before, and you're just as interested in it as the group is.
Yes, I think with stories and with buildings, I'm sure you have this. I'm sure it's one of the big reasons why we keep going is I will never get bored of the streets of London, especially those special buildings, those places. To me, they will never feel stale. Whenever you turn the corner and you're at St. Bartholomew the Great Church, or you're, as you say, you're near Bank and you go off and you go down one of the alleyways, every time I just go, this is amazing. And also for me personally, having had a grandfather who was very passionate about saving old buildings, the miracle that these things are still here and we can actually still enjoy them.
Very much so, yeah. And I think it feeds in. There's lines as well that you get as a guide. Often some of the best lines have come about quite by accident. It's something I've said or you've said that you haven't said it as humour. You don't think you've made a joke, but the audience reacts with hysterical laughter. They think it's hilarious. And you think, whoa, and then you think about it, you think, oh, hang on, I've just got a great punchline there. And then some of the lines I've used for years, and they came about quite by accident, just something I'd said, and it got that reaction, and then you put it into the tour. And I think the important thing about, again, using humour in the tour is it's like a comedian. It's got to seem to the audience like it's an off-the-cuff remark. It's the first time you've ever cracked that joke. Of course, if they come back on several tours and you crack the same joke again, then they start to spot a pattern there. But one of my favourite ones, you were talking about buildings in the City of London, and I always love it when people go, what's that building there? And they'll point at St. Paul's Cathedral or the Tower of London or an old an obviously old building. And I always go, I don't know, it wasn't there last week. and, and or people will see a blue plaque on the wall. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, even as guys, we can't possibly know everything. And someone spotted a blue plaque about somebody, and they go, "Who's that?" And again, it was quite by accident this came about, but it just got such a good reaction. I go, "Oh no, we don't talk about him," and straight away the audience go. You can see everybody's now. Why not? And I go, I don't actually know anything about him. and I think it's those off the cuff things. But I think the biggest thing for any would-be guide, anyone who wants to be a guide, is every statement you give, every story you tell, it's got to be told whenever you do it, however long you've been doing it, every time you do it, it's got to be like it's the first time you've ever told it.
Okay, Richard, it's time to ask you about your favourite part of London to give a tour. Is there any specific location where you find is the sweet spot, the place to go?
I've got places all over London. I mean, as you've said, London as a whole is such a fantastic place, and there's so much to see in London. I mean, I love the Inns of Court. I love the alleyways around the Bank of England, just off Cornhill and Threadneedle Street. Hampstead, I just love walking around Hampstead and turning those corners. But I think it's not so much a favourite part of London, but with the tours I do, it's bringing those parts of London in, because I think the tour route is as important as the content of the tour. So a tour isn't just about stories, because people can get stories off the internet. They can buy a book and read stories. It's about putting those stories into context and putting them into an area and an era. And so you give people this almost... You're structuring a film. And I think the most important thing about structuring a tour, for example, is the route you take. When you do a tour, you think, well, I've got to go from there to there, A to B. Well, A to B might be a dull route. You might be going past skyscrapers. But if on the way you can go to Z and Y by just doing a turn down an alleyway, you give your audience or your group something more. And to me, when I structure a tour, I want to have what I call wow moments. I want the audience to do what you've referred to earlier on, when they turn a corner and they see something and they just get that intake of breath. And as a guide, you often hear it behind you. I get this all the time when I'm doing the alleyways around the Bank of England. I'll turn an alleyway. And again, it's going in from a different angle. I mean, I could walk in off Cornhill through Bull Court, or I could come from the other side. But to me, going from Cornhill and then going through Bull Court, past what was Simpsons, and then past the George and Vulture, that is so fantastic, because you've got three wow moments. You've got that narrow alleyway that people go into and suddenly it's echoing. Then you've got Simpsons, or the building that was Simpsons, and then you go through the other bit of Bull Court and suddenly there's the George and Vulture with all these old Victorian buildings around it. And I often hear people say, oh, I'd never have known this was here. I'd never have known this was here. And I think it's creating those moments that then fit into the story you're about to tell them. And I think, especially with those alleyways, what I like, I do a Christmas Carol tour around there. And when we're in the alleyways, it's almost as though we've gone into this netherworld. And when we come back out at the end of the tour onto Leadenhall Street, it's like we've suddenly re-emerged. It's like we've been on a time machine and we've re-emerged into the 21st century. So the short answer to your question is, I haven't got a favourite part of London because I love all of London. But if you ask me to go into a part of London, then I would say the Inns of Court or the heart of the city around the Bank of England.
Yes, and those alleyways that have survived, it's fascinating you say that, of all things, because you said that feeling people get, they are the original layouts, and a lot of the buildings are original. So it really is time travel, but it always fascinates me how, you said they never would have gone down there. Well, of course they wouldn't, because, from a young age, we're told don't follow a stranger down an alleyway, a dark alleyway. There's something about having a tour guide where it's kind of like, well, okay, we're part of a group and this guy seems to know what he's doing.
I love that, because I think, you can say to groups, let's go down to this alleyway. Then halfway through you say, and you've just followed me into a dark alleyway. Down here. I always remember when I started doing the tours in 1982, there were a lot of older guides, men sort of in their 50s, 60s, which is me now. But back then I was in my 20s, and they'd all, majority of them had started their careers as stockbrokers messengers. And you don't see that anymore because of Big Bang and everything's done on the computer. But there used to be these people who got to know all the shortcuts through all the alleyways. And they were the runners, the jobbers for the stockbrokers. Their training was to know the shortest cuts because you couldn't just send it down the internet, down broadband. When you did a stock trade or a share trade, that had to be taken to people. And so these were, if you like, the information superhighway of the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. And they'd all had careers being these stockbrokers, messengers and jobbers. And it was fantastic talking to them. Of course, now you don't get them anymore because they've been retired. Or some of them are long since dead. But I always remember some of those old guys were fantastic. And the stories they used to tell as well.
Richard, you are a very personable and likeable fellow. And I want to explore that a bit more because we've all been on tours where the tour guide is very knowledgeable. They might even have a good voice. But if they didn't connect or if you don't get on with them very well, it doesn't get the tour to that level that we want to be achieving. Can you talk to me a bit more about that?
Well, I think it's all about liking people. To be a good tour guide, you've got to be a people person. You've got to enjoy people's company and like people as well. And I think one of the things I always found out when I did families or whatever is I was always interested in the family. I wanted to know what they did, what their life was, because from that you get to know how you can sort of make a tour for them. So I think you've got to be a people person. You've got to like people, and I think you've got to be concerned for people as well. You're not like a brain surgeon when I say putting their life in your hands, but they're investing 2 hours of their time, or if it's a full day tour, 6-7 hours of their time with you. And if it's just you talking about history and you talking about you, then I just think you're going to lose them. Whereas if you become their friend in London and you're chatting with them, you want to know what you do, what are you interested in, what makes you laugh, then you can improve the tour. And I always find when I do family tours, for example, if I'm taking families around, it's coming out of those conversations. They'll say, oh, I'm really interested in this, or I like the Beatles. And we might be near Kensington High Street. And I might say, oh, just down here is the balcony from the old EMI that the Beatles are photographed leaning over. Shall we go and have a look at it in the window? And they go, oh, yeah. So I think by liking people and discussing things with people and talking with people, you can learn what they want and you can give them the tour they want.
Richard, over 41 years, you've taken around so many different people, thousands and thousands and thousands of people, from, as you say, private families to school groups to tourists. And we've talked a lot about schools. We've talked a lot about groups of tourists and families and so on. It is that time where I want to ask you about some of the other people that are more known, should we say. Dare I use the word celebrity? Now, neither of us are name droppers or people taken in by this culture, but I do have to ask you about some of the more well-known names that you've shown around. So I know you're very reluctant to name drop, but can you just tell us a few of the people that you've shown around that the listeners might know?
Well, I don't like to name drop, but I will. I think one of the first celebrities I took around was on a Jack the Ripper tour. It must have been the mid-1980s, and Joan Rivers turned up on the tour, and I took Joan Rivers round on the Jack the Ripper tour, and at the end of the tour she said, to be honest, I didn't even recognise it. I'm the world's worst for recognising people. I was really put out because people were photographing this woman on my tour. And I was thinking, well, I'm the guide. But at the end, she asked me if I would take her around. And so I did a ghost walk, and I did several ghost walks for her privately, took her and her friends round. She would come when she was appearing in London. So she'd be I think she was doing a TV programme with Peter Cook at the time. They were doing a chat show. And then she was doing like some specials for TV. And she asked me to take her. So she'd always do it after the filming. So we'd often start 11 o'clock at night, and then we'd go till 1 o'clock in the morning doing these tours around London. One place she always loved was the Viaduct Tavern, the dungeons underneath the viaduct, or the supposed dungeons. The cellars, to be more precise. But I used to have to phone the landlord up and say, look, can we get in about midnight? And he'd let us go in and have a look around. So I think she was one of the first I did. I took Green Day. I got booked to take Green Day there.
The American rock band.
The American rock band. And again, I didn't have the foggiest idea who they were.
Is it just them?
It's just them.
I think it's three. Is it three of them?
It was when they were over for Live Aid.
Yeah.
And I met their coach. We walked around and it was Jack the Ripper tour that I took them on. And it was really weird because I'd be walking down, I'd pass all the other Jack the Ripper tours, and suddenly everybody was coming after my tour going, "Can we join your tour? You've got Green Day on your tour."
Did they look like Green Day?
They did. The hair
was gelled and everything was...
I mean, they looked like rock stars. They were the rock star part. I did a pilot with Bruce Dickinson. We did Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden came on my Ghost Walk, and I did a pilot with him. We went round to... it's going to be called Ghoul Britannia, and it was about ghosts of Britain and ghosts of Britain, and we were going to be taken around in a sort of a helicopter to go around visit these places, but it never came off. But
presumably the budget for that would have
it would have been. I always remember as well because when they did the pilot, they had this wonderful pilot, and they said, "How many books have you sold, by the way?" And I said, "I don't know, it's about 20,000." And they did this pilot, and it starts with Bruce Dickinson, over 60 million records sold, and then came with me, over 20,000 books sold. and I just love that one. One of the best ones I ever did, it wasn't a tour as such, but I got invited to go down the late Sir Donald Sinden. And I went down to he lived in a place on Romney Marsh.
I'm going to be honest, Sir Donald Sinden, the name is not connecting with me. Can you, maybe some of the listeners might not know either. So they'll be Googling straight away. But
older listeners of a certain age will remember Donaldson. He had that wonderfully plumb voice. He was in a lot of the comedy films from the 1960s.
I probably have.
He often played. He was in Day of the Jackal.
Right.
I don't know if you saw Day of the Jackal with Edward Fox. You can ask me who Edward Fox was now. Yeah. But he was one of our great actors. He was the man who started. It's not there anymore, but he started. He was behind the Theatre Museum in Covent Garden. But I went down to spend some time with him to do a series of DVDs on London theatres, and he was fantastic. I was 89 at the time. But I just got so many fantastic stories off him. I think it was 2 days down there just chatting with him, getting stories off him, talking about his life in theatre and his life in films, and it was just fantastic. All the anecdotes about the theatres he told me, and quite a few of those I now put on tours as well, because I've got some fantastic inside stuff about Laurence Olivier, about Noel Coward. Have you heard of him? and he'd worked with them all, and he was the last. What I found most fascinating about him was he'd actually met Lord Alfred Douglas, the one, Oscar Wilde's lover, the man who effectively led to the downfall of Oscar Wilde. And he'd actually met Lord Alfred Douglas when he was a young actor. And it's, to me, that was fantastic. But no, there's been others, but I can't recall them offhand. And I'm sure some of them have said that they've met Richard Jones.
I'll have to get them on. More about that.
Yeah.
Well, finishing with a joke, true to your style, Richard. Thank you ever so much for taking the time to come on this podcast.
And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for listening, listeners. Until next time, take care. Hello, everybody. It's me again. Just a very quick reminder. If you've not done so already, then please subscribe or click follow, depending on your podcast app. And also, if you've really enjoyed listening to this, then please click either 5 stars or like, depending which option is available for you. The next episode will be out next month. Until then, cheerio.